On a chilly April morning in a sleepy Yukon town in Oklahoma, a 10-year-old boy emerged from his bedroom, unaware that his world was about to shatter forever. The house was nestled in a quiet residential neighborhood along Check Hall Road, where neighbors greeted each other with waves and small talk while watering the lawn. But that morning, an eerie silence hung over every corner. No chatter, no bustling footsteps, no smell of coffee, or the familiar sounds of mourning in a family of 6. Just an eerie emptiness, a sign that something was wrong. The Candy family had long been a beloved local role model. Jonathan Candy, the jovial father, worked at the Paycom Center with a constant smile. Lindsay, the gentle wife, who sang in a choir in her hometown of Prague, brought warmth to every family photo posted on social media. Their 4 children, Dylan, Ethan, Lucas, and their 10-year-old son, are their pride and joy, appearing regularly at school events, sports activities, and even on local television. They are the kind of family that one would think would never have trouble, but in the real world, sometimes the picture-perfect facade is just a thin veil that hides the cruel truth behind it. The evening of April 21st, 2024 passed as usual in the quiet neighborhood where the Candy family lived. There was no arguing, no sign of conflict. From the outside, the house was still lit and quiet as always. But inside, something had quietly begun to change. Around midnight, according to investigators' estimates, Jonathan Candy, a 42-year-old father, walked down the familiar hallway of his home, carrying a handgun. There was no immediate sign that anyone had heard the gunshots. That's what made the subsequent investigation so puzzling. The victims were all said to have been attacked suddenly, with no screams, no signs of a struggle. Lindsay, the wife, was said to be the first to be killed. Investigators believe the incident occurred while she was in the bedroom on the ground floor. Jonathan then went upstairs where his 2 sons, Ethan and Lucas, were sleeping. Judging by the position of the bodies and the time of death, they seemed to have no idea what had happened to their mother downstairs. They had no chance to fight back. The final victim was Dylan, the eldest son, a college student who, according to the investigation, may have just returned from school for the weekend. He was found in his own bedroom, lying quietly in a sleeping position. Jonathan ended his attack there, then returned to the ground floor. No one outside the house witnessed the incident. Neighbors said they did not hear any strange noises that night. Only some recalled a slight burning smell in the air around dawn, which then disappeared. This detail was later explained as a temporary activation of the fire alarm system, but it did not attract attention. What is remarkable is that no one, friends, colleagues, or neighbors, had noticed anything unusual about Jonathan in the days before. He had gone to work and had been joking around at the last basketball game as usual. No one had seen a man struggling with dangerous thoughts or showing signs of losing control. If anything had changed, it had happened quietly. It could have been a simmering argument between husband and wife, a spiraling thought that had no way out, or a night when reason finally succumbed to the darkness in his mind. But everything, from the timing to the method, suggested a quiet, calculated process, not chaotic, not rushed. And it was all the more haunting to think about the cold alertness in every step of the perpetrator. Every room in the familiar house became a silent witness to an unexpected tragedy. A night of terror with no witnesses, no warning signs, but enough to forever change the fate of the sole survivor. On the morning of April 22nd, 2024, the soft sunlight shone through the small window on the upper floor of the house at 703 Check Hall. The youngest child in the Candy family woke up as usual, thinking that he would start a new school day. He walked out of his room still wearing slippers, his eyes absent-mindedly scanning the hallway. But after only a few steps, he stopped. Something was wrong. There was no calling from the kitchen. No one woke him up. The house seemed to stand still, eerily silent. Approaching the stairs, the boy saw unusual marks on the floor, something too strange for a child. Then he stopped when his eyes met the incomprehensible scene at that age. For a few seconds, time seemed to freeze. The boy did not scream, did not cry. He just quietly walked to the phone. The 911 call was recorded at 9:35 a.m. On the other end of the line, the operator heard a small, broken and bewildered voice. The boy did not know how to describe it, only saying that no one in the house is awake anymore. Immediately, the police and ambulance were dispatched to the scene. When the first force arrived, the scene before their eyes made everyone speechless. There was no sign of breaking the door or fighting outside. The house was completely intact. The lawn was still wet with morning dew. But inside, the atmosphere was completely different. A feeling of suffocation, coldness, and silence enveloped every step. The rapid response force checked each room in turn. On the ground floor, the body of a woman was discovered first, lying near the living room area. Next to it were signs of no resistance. Everything was neat, no broken objects. On the upper floor, 3 more bodies were discovered in different bedrooms, each lying on the bed or near the resting area. All the victims were lifeless. The silence was eerily quiet, as if the house were keeping a terrible secret. What caught the police's attention was a young boy, the only survivor, who was still isolated outside, mildly traumatized but physically safe. The scene was immediately sealed off. Forensic units were called in, while a psychological support team began working with the survivors. A house that had once been filled with laughter was suddenly the focus of a major investigation. No one understood what had happened, but all eyes were on the house, waiting for answers. After sealing off the scene, the forensic team proceeded to examine the house with extreme caution. Every step was recorded, every trace collected, because there was something here that made everyone feel uneasy, as if the answer was hidden in the silence itself. There were no signs of forced entry. The main door and windows were intact, with no signs of forced entry. Inside, all the furniture was neatly arranged. There was still an unfinished glass of water on the dining table, and a coat was hanging loosely on the back of a chair. Unfinished like the life of this house, the victims all died from gunshot wounds to the chest or head, according to the initial examination results. There were no signs of struggle or self-defense. That suggests they may have been attacked while they were sleeping or in a state of unconsciousness. The time of death was determined to be between 2 and 4 a.m., which matched the time when the survivors reported hearing unusual sounds during the night. One detail that particularly caught the investigators' attention was the way the bodies were arranged, each in a different position in separate rooms, as if the killer knew exactly what he was doing. The gun was found near the father's body, with no trace of a stranger. But the strangest thing was, among all of them, there was one room that remained intact, untouched. The room of the youngest boy, the only one still alive. And it was that room that raised the first question that led to the investigation later on. Once the scene was stabilized and preliminary evidence was collected, the investigation team focused on analyzing the whole picture of the case. With no signs of forced entry, no traces of strangers, and the murder weapon lying close to the body of the father, Jonathan Candy, the police quickly narrowed the main suspect to the family. However, absolute caution was maintained. The investigators knew that, in cases that shock the community, it was easiest to jump to conclusions. Therefore, they proceeded to question all relevant witnesses, including relatives, neighbors, close friends, and even colleagues of the victims. The first person to be approached was the sole surviving boy. With the support of a child psychologist, the boy was questioned gently, without pressure. In a fragmented and haunting account, He only remembered hearing a strange and small sound around midnight, followed by absolute silence. This coincidentally matched the estimated time of death later confirmed by the coroner, between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. More importantly, the boy did not mention the presence of any strangers that night, nor did he hear any arguing or fighting. Meanwhile, other interrogations revealed valuable pieces of the puzzle. A close friend of Jonathan's said that in recent weeks, he seemed more quiet than usual. He talked less, participated less in group activities, and even refused a meeting that he had scheduled earlier. Although the cause was unclear, this was a sign that Jonathan may have begun to fall into a state of psychological stress. A veteran investigator shared that he paid special attention to a small but repeated detail. When asked about the family's financial situation, most relatives answered fine, while neighbors described them as frequently talking about money. It was this discrepancy in their statements that led the investigation team to expand into Jonathan and Lindsay's personal finances. From bank, credit, and bill data, the truth gradually emerged. The Candy family was facing serious debt pressure. Credit card payments were late for many periods, the bank account was often in negative status, and some household bills had been notified to be disconnected if not paid on time. With an unstable income from a part-time job, Jonathan seemed to be carrying the burden in silence. A major turning point came from the search of electronic devices. On Jonathan's personal phone, the investigation team found a series of unsent messages, drafted but never pressed the send button. In them, he expressed feelings of failure, disorientation, and notably said, "I don't have the strength to fight anymore, but I can't abandon you and the children." The words, according to the psychologist, were a sign of a deep inner turmoil, where the man felt like a burden, but could not bear to leave his loved ones. On Jonathan's laptop, a note file was found. The file name was simply "Finally." Inside was a series of scattered notes, in no particular order, sometimes emotional, sometimes like a list of thoughts. There were references to debt, to feeling out of control, and to not being able to communicate with Lindsay. There was no clear statement, but what was recorded showed a man who was gradually falling into a psychological darkness that no one around him realized. The police did not need to arrest anyone because the person responsible for the tragedy was no longer there. However, the completion of the investigation file was still carried out as in any major crime. Documents were classified, statements were recorded, psychological analyses, and forensic data were all included in the file. When the final report was signed, the official conclusion of the investigation was a murder-suicide, with the motive stemming from a severe psychological crisis, fueled by financial pressure and prolonged mental isolation. A case with no survivors, but leaving behind great pain and lessons about what was hidden behind the seemingly harmless smile of a father, a husband, a man who quietly collapsed in his own home. The case closed without a defendant, but the legal system still held a special hearing as a way to reveal the truth and share it with the community. The trial took place at the Canadian County Courthouse in a heavy atmosphere. Attendees were not looking for anyone to be convicted, but only to understand how a seemingly ideal family could collapse so silently. Here, the entire case file was released, from the autopsy, behavioral psychological assessment, to unsent messages and financial documents. The representative of the prosecutor's office made it clear this was an internal murder case with the element of self-destruction due to despair. The argument was not aimed at blaming, but to warn about the consequences when a person falls into a mental crisis without being heard. The speaker on behalf of the victim's family, also relatives on both sides, said in a choked voice, "We are not looking for enemies. We just hope that everyone will not take lightly the silence of their loved ones." The testimony that silenced the courtroom came from a former colleague. He recalled the last time he saw Jonathan at a basketball game, when he was still smiling and talking, but moments later he was sitting silently, staring blankly at the floor. If I had asked him a question, maybe things would have been different. The response from the community was strong. Thousands of shares on social media expressed grief and called for more attention to mental health, especially for men who often hide their pain behind a strong facade. No verdict was handed down, but the trial was a profound reminder that sometimes a timely inquiry can save a family from falling apart. When the lights in that house went out forever, Yukon lost not only a family, but also a sense of peace that had been so real in the heart of the community. The loss of 5 people, including 3 children full of potential, left a void that nothing could fill. And behind that pain, a child, the only survivor, will grow up with memories that no one should have to carry. The tragedy goes beyond the number of victims. It raises an alarm about how society views silent but dangerous problems, like financial stress, mental health crises, and isolation within the home. Not everyone who is silent is okay. Not every smile is synonymous with happiness. The law may protect the body, but only care and understanding can preserve the human soul. Family, school, work, each of us can be the first to spot the signs of a flood brewing inside someone. This isn't just one family story, it's a reminder for all of us. Is there something quiet in your best friend? Is there someone in your family who needs a real talk? And if so, will you be the first to speak up or wait until it's too late?